Daddy? The word stopped Kang Jun-seo in the middle of the busiest sidewalk in Seoul, the way a bullet stops a man from the inside out. He had heard 10,000 words that morning, demands, threats, the soft apologies of men who feared him. None of them had touched him. But this one small word, spoken in a child's voice somewhere near his knee, went through 9 years of armor like it was paper. He looked down. 2 boys looked back up at him, identical, maybe 3 years old, bundled in second-hand winter coats, a size too big, holding hands the way twins do when the world is loud, and their faces. God help him, their faces. They had his face. The same sharp line of the jaw that men in boardrooms learn to fear, the same dark, serious eyes, the same small frown they both wore now, studying him as if they too were trying to solve an impossible problem. Junho, Minho, come here, now. The voice came from behind the boys, low and sharp and afraid, and Kang Jun-seo lifted his eyes from the children to the woman rushing toward them through the crowd. And the entire engineered world he had built for 9 years cracked straight down the middle. He knew her. Of course he knew her. He had spent a year trying to forget her, and failed every single night. To understand why the most feared man in Seoul stood frozen on a sidewalk while strangers flowed around him like water around a stone, you have to go back, not 3 years, 4. Back to the winter, when Kang Jun-seo was not yet a king, and a woman named Amara Okonkwo made the mistake of being kind to him on the worst night of his life. 4 years ago, the Kang organization was at war, and Jun-seo was losing. His father had died 8 months earlier, and the old man had left his son an empire and 100 enemies who all believed a 30-year-old heir was a meal waiting to be eaten. They were close to right. 2 of his father's lieutenants had already defected. A shipment had been seized. And on a freezing night in December, an ambush meant to end the Kang line entirely had instead left 3 of his men dead, and Jun-seo himself bleeding from a knife wound under his ribs, running through the back alleys of a district where nobody knew his face. He made it 4 blocks before the cold and the blood loss folded his legs underneath him. He went down behind a small restaurant, in the steam from a kitchen vent, and he remembered thinking, with the strange calm of a man watching himself from above, that this was a stupid place for a king to die. Next to a dumpster, in someone else's neighborhood. And then a door opened, and a woman with a bag of kitchen scraps for the alley cats found a half-dead stranger in a $1,000 coat bleeding into the snow. Anyone sensible would have called the police. Or run. A bleeding man in an expensive suit in that part of the city was nothing but trouble. And Amara Okonkwo had enough trouble. She was 26, from Enugu, 3 years into a Seoul that had never once made room for her, working double shifts at a restaurant whose owner paid her in cash and called it generosity. She did not call the police. She did not run. She crouched in the snow, pressed her own scarf against the wound, and said the first words Kang Jun-seo would ever hear from her, in careful, accented Korean. "You are not allowed to die behind my restaurant. Do you understand me? I just mopped." He laughed. It tore the wound, and it was the first time he had laughed since his father died, and something in him, some frozen thing, cracked an inch. She got him inside. She was small, and he was not, and she half-dragged him through the kitchen to the tiny storeroom in the back, and she stitched the knife wound with a sewing kit and a bottle of soju to clean it. Because going to a hospital, he told her through gritted teeth, would get them both killed. She did not ask why. She would tell him much later that his eyes told her enough. That she had seen men with that look before, back home, men the violence had swallowed, and that she had decided in the snow that she was not going to let the snow have this one. For 9 days, Amara hid the most dangerous man in Seoul, in a storeroom the size of a closet. She brought him soup before her shifts and rice after them. She changed his bandages with hands that did not shake. She did not know his name, and he did not offer it, and somehow that made it easier for both of them to be honest about everything else. The second day, she nearly turned him out. She had gone to throw away the bloodied scarf and found a black car idling at the mouth of the alley, 2 men inside it, watching the back of the restaurant with the patience of people who were paid to wait. She had walked past it with her heart in her throat and a bag of trash in her hands, just another invisible foreign worker, and the men had not even looked at her. That was the night she understood the stranger in her storeroom was being hunted, and that helping him could get her killed, and she went and sat on the floor beside him in the dark for a long time, deciding. "There are men in a car outside," she told him, "watching, for you." He had gone very still. "Then I will leave tonight. You should not die for a stranger." I did not say leave. She had pulled her knees up to her chest. I said, "There are men in a car. I am deciding something. Be quiet while I decide." He was quiet, and in the end she decided the way she decided everything, which was with her whole stubborn heart, and she stayed. And she kept the light off in the storeroom for 9 nights so the men in the car would never see a shadow that did not belong. He told her things in that storeroom he had never told another living soul. About a father who measured love and usefulness, who had once made a 9-year-old Junseo stand in the rain for 4 hours for crying at his mother's funeral, because a Kang does not weep where men can see. About being a son who was only ever an heir, a thing to be sharpened and pointed, never a boy to be held. About how tired he was, how bone-tired, of a life he had not chosen and could not leave. And she told him about Enugu, about the mother she sent money to every month without fail, about her father who had died when she was small, about the dream of a small catering business and a kitchen of her own, with her name over the door, in a city where her name meant something, about how loneliness in a foreign country is a specific kind of cold that no coat fixes, a cold that lives behind the ribs and wakes you at 4 in the morning to remind you that if you vanished, it might take a week for anyone to notice. "Someone would notice you," he had said in the dark. He had surprised himself saying it. "You don't even know my name," she had said. "Tell me then." "Amara," she had smiled, though he could barely see it. "It means grace. My grandmother chose it. She said I would need it." Amara. He had said it once, quietly, like a man testing the weight of something he intended to keep. Grace. Yes. You would need it to spend 9 days nursing a man the whole world wants dead and never once ask him why. "I am afraid of the answer," she had said, "so I am choosing the man in the storeroom instead of the answer, just for 9 days. After that, you go back to whatever made those men, and I go back to being invisible, and we will both pretend this was a fever." On the 9th night, well enough to walk, he stood in the storeroom doorway and looked at her for a long time, and Amara Okonkwo did the second reckless thing. She crossed the room and kissed him, and he kissed her back like a drowning man, and for one night the king and the kind woman forgot there was a war outside the door. In the morning, he was gone. There was money on the storeroom shelf, more money than she had ever seen, and no note, because Kang Junseo did not yet know how to say the things a note would have to say. He told himself it was protection, that a woman connected to him was a target, and the kindest thing he could do was vanish and let her stay invisible and safe. He told himself that for 4 years. He almost believed it. What he did not know, what he could not have known because he vanished before she did, was that Amara had not stayed invisible. She had stayed exactly long enough to discover she was pregnant. And then the war he was protecting her from had found her anyway. But that part of the story belongs to her. And she is rushing toward him on a Seoul sidewalk right now, 4 years later, to pull her sons away from a stranger she prays will not recognize them. Back on the sidewalk, the world restarted. Amara reached the boys and gathered them against her legs, one hand on each small shoulder, and she looked up at Kang Jun-seo with a face that had learned, in 4 hard years, to give away nothing. "I am sorry," she said in Korean to the dangerous stranger. "They are not afraid of anyone. We will go." She did not say his name. That was the thing that nearly broke him. She looked him dead in the eye, the man who had bled in her snow, the father of the children gripping her legs, and she pretended, for their sake, that she had never seen him before in her life. She turned to leave. "Amara." She stopped. Her back went straight. The boys looked up at her, then up at the man, sensing the shift in the air the way children always do. "Don't," she said quietly, still not turning around. "Whatever you are about to say, don't. We have a life. It is small, and it is hard, and it is ours, and you are not in it. Let it stay that way." Are they mine? It was not a question. They both knew it was not a question. The whole street could see it was not a question. Two boys with the face of the man standing in front of them. There was no question left anywhere in the world. Amara turned around slowly, and when she looked at him, there were tears standing in her eyes that she refused to let fall, and her voice came out low and furious and 4 years deep. "They are mine," she said, "only mine. You left money on a shelf and disappeared, and I had them alone, in a country that hates me, while men I never met tried to find me because of you. You do not get to walk up on a sidewalk and say a word like mine. You lost that word the night you left it on the shelf, with the cash." And Kang Jun-seo, who had not flinched from a gun in 9 years, flinched from that. "Men try to find you," he said slowly. "What men?" Something flickered across her face, fear, fast and old. And he understood, with the cold clarity that had kept him alive for a decade, that there was a great deal about the last 4 years that he did not know, and that some of it was still hunting. "It does not matter now," she said. "It was a long time ago." "Amara, what men?" But she was already turning again, already moving, one hand on each boy, melting into the river of the crowd the way she had taught herself to disappear. And over her shoulder, she said the last thing he would hear from her that day, the thing that would burn in him through every hour until he found her again. "The kind of men your world makes. Goodbye, Jun-seo. Don't follow us. You are good at leaving. Be good at it one more time." And then she was gone, swallowed by the city, two small dark heads bobbing away from him through the crowd until he could not tell them from anyone else's children. Kang Jun-seo stood on the sidewalk for a long time. Then he took out his phone, and he called the one man in the world he trusted, and when his second answered, the most feared man in Seoul said 6 words in a voice that had gone very quiet and very terrible. "Find me everything about the woman." What Jun-seo's men brought him over the next 3 days rearranged his entire understanding of his own life. Amara Okonkwo, 29 now, on record as a single mother of twin boys, age 3, working 2 jobs, living in a single room in a building scheduled for demolition, clean, quiet, invisible by ferocious effort. But underneath the clean record, his men found the scars. 3 years ago, a fire in the building where she had been living ruled accidental an electrical fault. Except Jun-seo's people, who knew how the families made things look accidental, found the pattern of it and went cold because the fire had started on her floor, at her end of the hall, at 3 in the morning, and the fire inspector who signed it off had bought a new car the following month. 2 years ago, an assault, an attempted abduction outside a clinic where she had taken a sick child, reported to the police, and quietly closed with no suspect, the file thin as paper. A pattern of moves every 8 or 10 months. The moves of a woman running from something she could not name to authorities who would not have believed her, leaving no forwarding address, paying cash, trusting no one. There was more. A man had been asking about her at the restaurant where she used to work 2 years back. A polite Korean man in a good suit who said he was a lawyer settling an estate and wanted to find her. The owner had given him nothing, but he had described the man to Junseo's people, and the description was of no lawyer Junseo had ever heard of. There was a withdrawn job offer, a catering position she had nearly gotten, pulled at the last minute after a phone call from someone the company would not name. Every door that had ever opened for Amara Okonkwo in 4 years had been quietly closed by a hand she could not see. Someone had been hunting Amara Okonkwo and her children for years, not to kill her quickly, to find them, to keep them cornered, isolated, poor, and movable. And the timeline started the same winter Junseo vanished from a storeroom. He sat with the file until 3 in the morning, and the longer he sat, the clearer and more sickening it became. Because there was only one way the war of 4 years ago could have known about a restaurant storeroom and a kind woman, he had told no one. He had walked back into his house after 9 days and said he had hidden in an empty warehouse, and no one had questioned the boss. Only one way an invisible foreigner could have become a target. Someone inside his own organization had known he was there. Someone had followed the blood, found the storeroom, watched from a black car at the mouth of an alley, and then said nothing to Junseo, nothing at all, and instead spent 4 years quietly trying to erase the only people alive who could prove that Kang Junseo had a weakness and an heir. Someone who understood that 2 boys with the boss's face were not children, they were leverage, or a threat, depending on who held them. His sons had been hunted since before they could walk, by his own house. And Amara had carried that alone, had outrun it alone, had raised 2 boys in its shadow alone, and had still looked him in the eye on that sidewalk, and chosen to protect them from him rather than ask him for help. Because in 4 years, the only thing his world had ever sent her was men in the dark. Junseo closed the file. He sat in the dark of his enormous empty house, the house his father built, and he did something he had not done since he was a boy. He decided to choose. Not the empire, not the war. For the first time in his life, Kang Junseo decided that the most important thing in his world was 3 people in a single room in a condemned building, and that the man who had been hunting them for 4 years had just made the last mistake of his life. He found the building at dawn. He did not bring soldiers. He understood, finally, that soldiers were the entire problem, that every time his world touched her, it left a wound. So he came alone, in the gray light, and he climbed the stairs of the dying building, and he stood outside a door with peeling paint and a child's drawing taped to it, 2 stick figures and a smaller third one, and he heard, through the thin wood, his sons laughing. He stood there with his hand raised to knock, and he could not do it. What right did he have? He had left her money on a shelf. He had built a kingdom while she bled. Every danger in her life had his name underneath it. The kindest thing, the thing he had told himself for 4 years, was to leave. He lowered his hand, and the door opened anyway, because Amara had heard a man stop outside her door and go silent, and a woman who had been hunted for 4 years does not let a silence outside her door go unanswered. She stood in the doorway with a kitchen knife held low and steady at her side, and behind her 2 small faces peeked around her legs, and when she saw him, her whole body went tight, and then, slowly, when she saw he was alone, when she saw his face, something in it she had not seen in 4 years, it changed. "I told you not to follow us," she whispered. "I know," Junseo said. "I have been good at leaving my whole life." My father trained me for it." He looked at her and at the two boys, and his voice broke on the next words in a way the men in his boardrooms would never have believed. "I am 34 years old, and I have never once been good at staying. I came to ask you to let me learn. Not for the word. I gave up the word. I know that. Just to stay close enough to keep the dark away from them. That is all. You never have to give me anything." Amara looked at him for a long, long moment. The knife did not move. And one of the boys, the bolder one, Min-ho, slipped past her legs before she could stop him and walked right up to the enormous, frightening stranger and looked up at the face that was his own face grown tall and asked the question that would decide everything. "Are you the daddy from the picture?" Jun-seo went down on one knee on the filthy hallway floor so that he was level with his son's eyes, and his voice would not work for a moment, and when it did, it came out as barely a whisper. "What picture?" Amara closed her eyes, and from inside the single room, taped to the wall beside the boy's shared bed where she thought he would never see it, was a photograph she had never been able to throw away. A picture from a phone, 4 years old, of a sleeping man in a storeroom, taken by a woman who had told herself 100 times to delete it and never once had. She had kept his face for them all this time while she ran. "I told them their father was a good man who had to go away to fight a war," she said quietly, and the tears finally fell, 4 years of them. "I did not have the heart to tell them the truth. That I did not know if it was even true." Kang Jun-seo knelt on the floor of a condemned building in front of his son, with his other son's eyes on him and the woman who saved his life weeping in the doorway. And he made a decision that would burn his father's entire kingdom to the ground if that was what it took. "It's true," he said to the boy, to both boys. To her, "I had to go away to fight a war." He looked up at Amara. "I am going to end it now. All of it. And then I am never going to be good at leaving again." But ending it meant walking back into a house where someone had spent 4 years hunting his children. It meant finding the traitor who had turned a storeroom into a target. And it meant that the war Amara had been running from for 4 years was about to come looking for all of them together at last. She had kept them hidden by staying small. He was about to make them the most visible people in Seoul. And somewhere in the Kang organization, the person who had been waiting 4 years for Amara Okonkwo to surface had just learned that she had walked up to Kang Jun-seo on a public sidewalk, and that the boss had gone to a condemned building at dawn alone. The hunt was no longer quiet. If this story has its hooks in you, hold on, because this is only half of it. In part 2, Jun-seo brings Amara and the twins inside the most dangerous house in Seoul to protect them, not knowing he is bringing them straight to the one who has been hunting them all along. The traitor has a face you will not expect. The reason Amara was hunted is worse than either of them imagined, and the choice Jun-seo has to make in the end will cost him everything his father built. Part 2 arrives on Seoul and Seoul Stories in just a few days. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so it reaches you the moment it drops. And tell me in the comments before you go. Amara protected her sons from their own father for 4 years and kept his photo on the wall the whole time. Was she right to hide them, or did he deserve to know? I read every single one. I will see you in part 2.